Preparing of a rat line includes route validation. Preparing the legs of a rat line starts when the principal personally cases the leg. The principal should travel the leg before use. This gives him an opportunity to take note of difficult terrain and vegetation, how much water and food he may need, what obstacles to overcome, and needed equipment. As the principal compiles this information, he starts completing and solidifying the route and gathers needed supplies and equipment. When casing, the principal views the activities of both the adversary and non-hostile persons. It is better to understand their actions, behaviors, and routines when the principal is not executing the rat line than making a simple capture-causing mistake. This allows the principal to avoid problem areas and unintentional encounters with potential threats. The principal has at least one alternative route for each leg. Circumstance have a funny way of changing during chaos, and the principal should have a backup if the primary leg is unsuitable. This is not like a contact where he validates the routes and locations a week or two before use. When a route line is needed, the principal may not have many options. The locations chosen for stops and caches need to be in areas occasionally accessible for validation and maintenance, especially caches. The principal should not put them so far away it becomes infeasible to emplace and support. Routes tend to either parallel or shortcut more frequented roads or paths. The more capable the principal, the further his route can be from frequented areas, which lends security. Caching. Once the principal knows exactly what he needs for each leg, he then gets those items and caches them. The principal needs a source of water. If the cache is near a creek or river, then the water itself may not need storing, only a filter or purification tablets, iodine. Regardless of the part of the world the principal is working, these items should be available. If the rat line will take longer than 24 hours, the principal needs some sort of food, especially if major legs are by foot. Reserves deplete quickly when activity and stress increases. Whatever the principal decides to store, he must keep track of any expiry dates and replace them so. The principal must execute the various legs of the rat line, but not at once, and take note of what he needs to succeed. The principal attempts to source the supplies and equipment needed within the area, avoiding adversarial encounters, and caches the contents per the caching chapter. The principal must cooperate with and heed the advice of those residents who aid in the rat line. Residents have skills or equipment the principal needs but does not have. If the principal is going to trust the resident to help in a very dangerous situation, then the principal needs to trust the resident enough to take part in planning. The principal does not go over the entire route with the resident, only the sections in which the resident is involved. The principal must never shut the resident out of a decision. All vehicles have limitations when it comes to natural obstacles. Land vehicles have an easier time because they use man-made improvements. Marine and aerial vehicles may not have such luxuries during a rat line, so the pickup location will depend on the mariner's or pilot's experience and ability with their craft. If the resident feels a course of action is a bad idea, the principal must understand why. If the resident needs convincing, the principal must encourage him to discuss his concerns. In the end, they must reach an agreement sincerely. The principal should never leave an issue unaddressed, lest it worry the resident and make him less reliable. The next sections will go into the benefits, limitations, and considerations for each of the four environments. Urban environments are straightforward. The principal should spend enough time in the target area to know which locations to pursue, which to avoid, the best ways to get there, and any available alternative routes. Urban environments offer the quickest way of travel on land because of improved roads. The principal should try to capitalize on its ease of navigation and speed as much as possible. Conversely, the principal is more likely to run into the adversary or hostile locals in urban environments. This is where most people live. To counter this, the principal transitions to a different environment, like temporarily traveling through the rural. Sometimes an entire route line passes through the urban, sometimes a route line never passes through the urban. Most of the time, legs will go through the urban like highways on the way to the destination. Urban considerations include pickups and drop-offs. The principal should recruit a resident to drive as much as possible to get to the destination, which maximizes speed and security. When it comes to the resident picking up the principal and dropping him off, the principal should follow many of the methods outlined in the vehicular chapter, with the understanding that the resident is driving the vehicle. The principal should still conduct counter-surveillance and only approach the resident's vehicle when there are no signs of surveillance or threats. The principal selects significantly more secluded areas which have less public traffic. However, it cannot be so far out of the resident's natural pattern that potential surveillance would consider it suspicious. The principal considers scheduling for a time when there is no human presence or when others would not consider a pickup suspicious. Furthermore, the principal selects a location with the secluded foot routes into and out of the site because he is not in a vehicle upon arrival. The principal avoids areas with people who may notify the adversary of his presence. Counter-surveillance can either be the principal teaching the resident surveillance detection routes or offering counter-surveillance support to the resident. The former is self-explanatory. For the latter, the principal sets up one or more posts to watch the resident entering an area and assesses for surveillance. If no surveillance is present, then the resident's route should be such that the principal can get from the observation post to the pickup in time. If the principal or resident spots surveillance, then they should have an alternative schedule to retry the pickup at a logical time after the first attempt. If the alternate pickup fails, then the principal should have an alternate route to get him further along the route line by foot, which may involve more caches until he reaches the next obstacle. Safe sites are places used for timing and rest. When traveling through the urban environment, this is lodging. The principal should not be renting the room himself, but have a resident reserve a room for him. The inn must have ways into and out of the room without the front desk or any cameras seeing the principal. This avoids any potential testimony or evidence that the resident helped the principal. If the driver is going to rent the room, the resident should drop the principal off out of sight so no one sees him with the driver. If the principal uses someone else and prepares this in advance, then he uses a drop to pass the key from his second resident to the principal and back again after he used the room. Routes the principal takes are self-explanatory. The principal maximizes efficiency by using roads, but he should not come across the adversary. He travels along the road when possible and then moves into the rural to bypass checkpoints or patrols. It may be proper to use the same driver after the checkpoint or patrol later along the leg if there is a suitable cover for the driver to be in the area. Otherwise, the driver went as far as he could and his services are no longer needed. Caches for the urban include what the principal needs to complete the leg. However, the nature of human presence may demand that he has some tools if the primary legs fail. A few useful items to consider: lockpicks, spring-loaded center punch, adhesive tape, multi-tool, flathead screwdriver with a non-conductive handle, abundance of local currency, and a change of clothes. If the principal sets up any signals with residents, he should keep a suitable signal in the cache in the event he does not bring one with him. Covers are worthless if the principal is still in the enemy-controlled area. The only place that a cover would matter is at a border crossing. The principal should not travel through official checkpoints with residents, even if they are not enemy-controlled. It is best if the principal separates from a resident before official encounters, including any hasty checkpoints the principal may come across. However, if the principal finds himself in a situation needing a cover, then a chance encounter, like if he were hitchhiking and the resident picked him up out of the kindness of his heart. The principal considers how he communicates with the resident. If using SMS or cell phones, the phone the principal uses must be only for this purpose. After they make contact, the resident removes the record from his phone and the principal destroys his phone. If asked about it later, then it is a one-off occurrence and the resident can easily explain away the contact with the wrong number. In most rural environments, the chances of encountering hostiles are low. This inclusion of the rural offers more flexibility in the principal's schedules, routes, and safe sites. The principal primarily uses the rural to bypass enemy encounters, but it can also cut the distances of the routes if there is not enough infrastructure between stops. Rural environments hinder movement and are more difficult to navigate and need more planning and preparation to ensure passage. The principal should minimize his time in the rural. The principal only spends as much time in it to avoid the adversary. If the principal is alone, he is more susceptible to dangers. Rural considerations include obstacles, include terrain, vegetation, and wildlife. Most of the time, the principal just avoids those areas known to have such obstacles by planning a circumnavigating route. If going around is not possible because it leads to a hostile area, it takes too long, or affords the adversary an advantage, then the principal may directly approach the obstacle. It is much easier to descend difficult terrain than ascend. Rock climbing is not only dangerous, but has two significant vulnerabilities: slow movement up and exposure to anyone in a large area. Conversely, rappelling offers quick descent in a matter of minutes or seconds. If it comes to ascending, the principal should find a suitable, concealed path up. Vegetation can be very difficult to pass, especially in the tropics. Often, cutting brush away will slow the principal down more than a group of people tracking him. In fact, if they get on his trail, the principal is working harder to clear a path for them as well. The more work he does, the less work they do, so the principal should avoid these areas. However, if the principal must clear something, then machetes are useful tools to cache. Wildlife is not just those beasts that attack humans, but also the small bugs that give people diseases. It does not take much time for diseases to incapacitate the principal. For larger game, a weapon used to kill them would be well worth mastering and caching. For those bugs-carrying diseases, the principal should allow a protective crust of dirt, sweat, and body hair to develop over his skin, or use certain oils to repel bugs. Unexploded ordnance often plagues poor or oppressive areas. War-torn regions leave these munitions scattered around. The principal must be very careful to select legs that do not cross areas with such ordnance. This may be tricky because many of the places the adversary may wish to defend with landmines also happen to be areas the principal must pass to avoid coming across them. If traveling to these types of regions, the embassy should have this information. Safe sites in the rural are anywhere there is no traffic. The further from civilization, the less risk of compromise. However, there are a few places the principal should consider more desirable than the open: caves and man-made structures. Caves offer some of the best shelter and concealment, but it is also a place wildlife frequents. If wildlife is known to be there, the principal should reconsider using it, especially in inclement weather where wildlife is more likely to seek shelter. Man-made structures are nice, but they pose a risk. These are only suitable when neighbors cannot see or hear a squatter's presence. If possible, the principal may recruit residents to offer their homes, sheds, or buildings as shelter. These residents can often aid the principal in other ways too, with information of adversarial activity or resupply. However, if the principal cannot recruit someone, he must ensure that he can get in, use the shelter, and leave without the owners knowing. This involves routes and schedules of when to ingress and egress the site. Caching is more important in the rural when the principal must travel any significant distance by foot. The principal works harder and longer in the rural than any other environment. He should plan the caches based on how far he can go and what he would need at the end of the legs. Some of the most basic would be water and food. Depending on where the principal is and how far he must travel, important supplies include extra socks, broken-in boots, weapons, animal deterrents, shelters, and candles. Extra socks are always good, and boots are important because the principal may not be wearing some at the start of the leg. Animal deterrents include ammonia in a leak-proof bottle, water gun, or soaked rags. Candles offer warmth in small spaces, but should be small enough it does not give away the principal position. Routes. The principal stays at least one terrain feature away from frequented areas so people will not accidentally stumble upon, see, or hear him. He avoids routes along ridges so he does not silhouette the skyline. The more or denser the brush he travels through, the more noise he makes and evidence he leaves behind for trackers. Search parties often travel in groups, which is inherently slower, unless they are in amazing shape and well coordinated. The principal takes advantage of this and selects his route to travel faster than a group of people. Aerial environments are everywhere. It is obvious, but every region on Earth has access to the skies. This is often the quickest way of getting out of an area, as the principal can travel directly to a destination in a mostly straight line and avoid ground obstacles. The benefit of air travel is even if the adversary knows the principal left by air, they will likely neither catch nor attack him. The only way the adversary can stop the principal would be deploying personnel to the principal's destination. Hopefully that is outside the control of the adversary. The vulnerability to exfiltrating by plane is how observable it is. Even if the host government is not involved with the adversary, flying may attract their attention in a negative way, especially crossing borders. If the principal stays within all legal constraints, then he should not worry. Aerial considerations include: the landing zone is one of the most crucial parts of a pickup. For more information, reference Pathfinder Operations FM 3-21.38. The principal will still need to learn from his pilot about the aircraft's specific limitations. While helicopters are great vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, they are expensive and have their own sets of landing and takeoff limitations. Depending on some parts of the world, short takeoff and landing vehicles may be the principal's only choice, which are significantly less expensive, but lack the vertical takeoff aspect. The principal reconnoiters from the air with the pilot when selecting landing zones. This way both people view the same landscape and are referencing the same observations. If not, the principal may need to learn as much as he can from the pilot about the requirements and then select suitable locations by physically casing the areas. Regardless of how the principal performs reconnaissance, the pilot must confirm and test the landing zone before the principal executes the route line. This limits the possibility the pilot would abort the pickup because the principal did not select a suitable site. Radar may be a problem for staying undetected by the adversary. One of the first missions would be to find radar stations, often co-located with airports, but there can be others along the country's border or on naval vessels for defense. To defeat these detection capabilities, pilots use natural, prominent terrain features, which offer coverage from radar, known as naps of the Earth. One of the principal's tasks is ensuring there would be enough coverage from radar so the pilot can get in and out without the radar operator seeing it. Flight paths must afford a safe means for the pilot to take off from his strip, make his way to the pickup, and back again without drawing attention. If the pilot stays out of view of the radar the entire time, then no one would be the wiser. If there are points where the pilot must drop off radar, then the principal should seek to understand why that is, out of range of the radar or flying below terrain features. While terrain features may conceal the pickup from radar, the principal ensures the ingress and egress routes are also safe from observation. The principal must first figure out what parts of the flight path need concealing. Then he figures out if there is suitable terrain that will allow for a nap of the Earth flying to get in and out of the area. The principal must rely on the pilot's knowledge when planning this. Border crossings can be a significant obstacle. The principal gets his visas beforehand and avoids crossing borders with much, if any, luggage. Everything the principal brings into the operational area should be expendable. At this point, the principal should not give border officials any reason to search or question him. The principal has the bare minimum, and his only aim now is getting to an international airport to go home. Covers for the relationship and pickup should not be too far from the truth because the principal is now answering to the officials in a friendly or neutral government. The principal can tell a story about how the pilot saw the principal stranded or whatever, but the safest course of action is telling the truth. Some violent and hostile people pursued the principal, and he called his friend to come get him. The principal may suffer a fine or a few nights in jail before the friendly or neutral government lets him go home, but that is much better than the torture or death after extradition back to the hostile area. Host governments' concerns are more with drugs, weapons, other forms of contraband, behaviors that deteriorate their society, or subversion to their authority. They neither want to pay for some naive person's meals nor bear responsibility for his health in their custody. If the principal poses no threat and makes it very clear he will never return, the authorities may accept the fee or bribe and let him go home. It is important to note that the principal should not rely on the assumption that nations who neighbor failed states will aid him fleeing the adversary. This is something that the principal must research and confirm. Making a wrong assumption here could be just as atrocious as capture by the adversary. Maritime considerations include the launch point is where the principal will transition from land to water. They should be around a cache to minimize efforts to haul watercraft to the water. Concealment from any observation posts or patrols is desirable, as well as minimizing exposure in open waters. Once the principal leaves the shore, he will embark on a friendly vessel which takes him the rest of the leg. The embarkation point is the area out from the coast where the principal boards the boat. The principal may swim or paddle to the boat instead of boarding the boat at some dock. Due to the limitations of the boat and the terrain underneath the water, the principal cases the mariner to ensure that the embarkation point is suitable for both parties. The embarkation point should be close to or on the mariner's established route, so the pickup does not draw unwanted attention. This also means the principal must plan the ratlines so that it links up with the mariner's route. The embarkation should also limit the duration on the boat with the mariner. If the mariner picks the principal up deep in enemy-controlled territory, then it is easier for the adversary to get ahead and stop the boat. If the pickup is that much further from where the adversary starts, then transportation is safer. Adversarial detection systems include radar, observation posts, and maritime patrols. These systems are how the adversary will detect the principal's exfiltration. The adversary does not necessarily man radar, but if the government believes the principal is a hostile actor, authorities may interdict. Interdiction is best in neutral or friendly areas to avoid sending the principal back to the adversary. Therefore, the mariner's route should not deviate much to mitigate the appearance of suspicious activities. The adversary may very well man observation posts and maritime patrols. The principal ensures neither the launch point nor the embarkation point are within view of an observation post or maritime patrol. If the principal must abort this pickup and wait for another pass, then he does so. The principal does not jeopardize the exfiltration. Routes need to be as direct and quick as possible, as there is an element of vulnerability when crossing open waters. The principal minimizes his time on the boat and enemy-controlled territory, which also minimizes the mariner's risk. Caches may have a kayak, raft, surfboard, or similar. Whatever the vessel or device, it should be small and portable. The principal may schedule a few trips on the boat to case suitable locations for the cache. The first trip to find and assess the locations found on a map with the mariner. The second trip to disembark and case the area on land. The last trip to load the cache with the equipment needed. Border crossing for maritime exfiltration is like that of crossing the border by air. If the principal arrives at a port, then he ensures all documents are ready and his visa is current. The principal may explain the situation and note that he is on his way home. The principal neither tries to hide in friendly or neutral countries, nor give them a reason to believe he is up to something illicit. He does not spend much time in the sanctuary country. He may visit the embassy or consulate to get coordination for travel out of the country, but ultimately goes home as soon as possible. Maritime law. Oppression usually follows poverty. This should not be that much of an issue, as the principal tries to travel from one poor and rural land to another. As these boats troll the areas for fish, for example, The goal is to board the boat as close to the coast from which the principal leaves, and that boat ferries him back to a port that is not in the target area. What the principal needs to understand is how these nations interact with each other and what laws apply to these shared waters. Covers for the relationship with the mariner should be like that of any other resident. The principal knew the resident because the resident transported the principal for intersum cover or pretext. As for discussing the nature of the ratline leg, the principal tells the truth. He got into an unpleasant situation and contacted his friend, the mariner, or during a normal route, the mariner saw the principal paddling out of the area and offered to take the principal across the border in return for payment. Like the aerial, the principal may pay a fine or spend a few days in jail before going home. This is much better than capture by the adversary.